and inclusion for the last 15 years. Her passions include working with executives to help them lean into difficult conversations about race and help ignite and enable people managers to lead globally diverse teams. We now have Dr. Dina Brown, Chief Diversity Officer of DC Brown International in the United States. Dina has worked in organizational development, change and transformation, and leadership effectiveness for over 20 years. As a certified human behavior consultant, DISC, she teaches leaders to engage, motivate, and develop their people successfully. Dr. Brown's vision helps enterprises harness human capital's power to embrace diversity, equity, inclusion, and belonging as an integral aspect of innovation and advancement. Dr. Dina Brown developed the shift factor theorem of aligned movement to provide context and a strategic roadmap from moving from where you are to where you desire to be by embracing these shifts. That's fantastic. Amazing, amazing profiles, all three of you. Appreciated for coming here, being part of this panel. It has just been such a wonderful journey with many companies we find, and HR professionals also, assume that diversity and inclusion are synonymous and that automatically implies one or the other, right? But that mistake is arguably a very, very risky one. Diversity does not stick without inclusion, and yet they cannot be lumped together. Aisha, let me start with you. Do you have a unified D&I language within your organization? And why is it so important to know the difference? What policies do you think you can have in place to align your organizational objectives?
Yeah, first of all, Assalamu alaikum. That's a really great question. I think in terms of having a unified language, the language needs to diversity and inclusion are two very, very different things. And for example, most of my career was spent in Dubai and in the UAE. And so we don't in the UAE don't have an issue with diversity. We have over at least 150 nationalities working together at any one point in time. We so what that would mean for an HR professional is to then understand where they are. So in terms of diversity, they're actually really great. They need to focus their efforts on inclusion. Does everybody who is part of that group, that very diverse group that you have, do they feel that they are in the in-group? Do they feel welcome? Do they feel heard? Do they feel fulfilled, etc.? I would also then just like to point out very quickly that when we talk about diversity, it is so easy to oversimplify, to say males, females, ethnic origin, race, religion, but there's diversity as well in your socioeconomic status. There's diversity in, your power distance. You may have an organization that, when you look at the data, is very, very heavy on a certain gender. But then when you look at the power dynamics, you'll see that the certain gender, for example, females, may actually all be at the lower levels. So you need to then work on that. And I stress this so much to say that there is no one formula that will work for everybody, but it's about understanding your demographics, understanding your need and your business strategy, and then focusing on what D&I element do you have to work on.
True. Absolutely. Dina, would you want to add your views to it?
She did such a great job of breaking it down, especially when we began to talk about what diversity truly actually is, and that we incorporate the construct of diversity of thought as well. So if we want to avoid groupthink, so when we are making decisions, so when we think about what biases really are, is actually poor decision making.
Yes.
And so if you have people that think the same, so you might have diversity as far as gender, diversity as far as, culture constructs, or what we deem as the social construct of race. But if I'm a hiring manager and I'm hiring people that think like me, then we truly don't actually have innovation either, because what I have is micro me's. And so that can stifle it. So I love what she said about really expanding the scope of diversity, and then really looking at what inclusion really means. It's not the fact that diversity says you are here, we have you. Inclusion says, oh, we see you, you're in the room. But really, I love to expand that to belonging, is that you actually have a voice and we hear you. We're taking your voice into consideration, and you are part of the decision making as we move forward. And so those are the just nuggets that I would add to that particular portion.
Right, absolutely. I think while Aisha mentioned about UAE being so diverse, I come from a place of India, and we are so diverse. The north, south, east, and west, different cultures, different food, everything is different. But inclusivity is the key, right? And we need to kind of add that huge element into the diversity and inclusion. What should I say? Hiring workforce, you did touch upon it a bit. Based on sexual orientation, race, religion, nationality, or gender, how diverse are we, and how can you? What advice would you give hiring managers when they are hiring their workforce?
Well, I say this, and it's definitely not tongue in cheek, is that do we truly honestly know how diverse we are when we talk about intersectional points? So the data that we gather on the onset is often gender, race, some basic things, but we don't dive in any deeper than that. Why? Because when we look at compliance issues and we look at other issues, and I want to speak to when we talk about even sexual preference, where you have to self-identify. And do I have psychological safety to even self-identify my religion, my sexual preference, and all those other pieces, whether I'm a single parent or not. And so when we look at how we're gathering the data about our diversity, we're already starting from a skewed place. We're looking through a single lens, oftentimes of gender and race. That's it. And so we're not really expanding the scope of that. So when you ask how diverse are we, I want to say it depends on what statistics you're looking at.
Yes.
And I can make them come to that.
We will touch upon data in a bit, but as you said, statistics is important. We'll touch upon data later. Let me invite Crystal into the conversation now. Crystal, when it comes to remote work, there is not a one-size-fits-all solution. How do you think organizations can adapt to different markets and different socioeconomic situations?
Thank you so much for the question. It's interesting because there's a lot of research now that indicates that there are several segments of the population, for example, Black women in the United States in particular, who are not looking forward to going back into the office due to the microaggressions and or unconscious biases that they experienced while working in the office. So to the point made earlier about being included, you're in the, you're there and you're visible, but can people really see you? And are you a part of the equation? Are you part of the conversation? So when we think about remote work, the other pieces of research indicate that a lot of people, different segments of the population from a diversity standpoint, are enjoying the remote working because office politics are mitigated, and different situations around bias that exist in the office do not exist. From a socioeconomic and geography standpoint, we do have to think of all of the things that have happened across the times of this pandemic that have created different situations for people. Some people have moved from expensive locations to be closer to family. People are leaning closer into their purpose. who have not gone back to work for whatever reason, not gone back to school for whatever reason, or people who now have to take care of their elderly parents because perhaps they got COVID and they have not quite yet recovered. So what happens when you tell that person, I want you in the office 5 days a week? What happens when you think about that from a caregiver status? So there's so many different dimensions to think about as we think about remote versus hybrid versus some other model. Some of the leading practices of organizations now are saying it's your choice. The office is there if you want to come in, but we're not going to mandate 3 to 4 days a week. Some people are going fully remote, which is giving a lot more flexibility as you think about hiring talent and hiring for diverse talent specifically. So there's no one size fits all, as you indicated, but it's so critical to think about what is the individual need, because it's a very individual thing. You need flexibility to exercise flexibility, and it really is a very individual thing.
True, and you rightly said that, because I was talking to another panel yesterday, and the gentleman was from Indonesia, and he mentioned that 90% of their workforce is working from home, and they have the choice of working from home. And it, again, as you said, there's no one size fits all. Like the travel industry or the hospitality industry or the medical industry, they can't be working from home. They have to get back to office. So it all depends on which industry you belong to, but it's all about how the decisions that leadership make in order to allow that flexibility, listen to the voice of their people, and be able to give them that flexibility of working from from the comforts of their home. So let's go to the next question, which is...
Wait, before you move on, can I just add one piece? I feel led to add this piece. When you added the ending portion about where we find the diversity, especially when remote work is not an option, and you don't see that in manufacturing or in the medical and the STEM sciences, et cetera. Now we have another portion of that. Why? Because women, over 68%, are the predominant ones that are taking care of the home and the children, especially during, the COVID restrictions and different lockdowns. And so when we see, not only you already saw lower numbers, less than 17% globally of women in these areas, especially like in manufacturing positions. However, now that number is reduced more significantly, because you're saying you don't have a choice. You have to go in. And so they're opting out. And so we have this mass involuntary exodus of women from those critical spaces that often have lacked diversity historically and systemically. And so how do we begin to deal with that? Especially now we're dealing with culture dynamics. We're dealing with mindset shifts. We haven't even begun to breach into the psychology of DEI. Yes. We're talking about
we spoke about data. Tell me, any of you could take this. What kind of DEI data pitfalls can we avoid? Aisha, do you want to take that?